Good day. It's Monday, April the 21st, 2025. Welcome to Denison Forum's Daily Article Podcast. I'm Chris Elkins narrating today's daily article, authored by our CEO and co-founder, Dr. Jim Denison. I woke up this morning to the news that Pope Francis, the first Latin American pontiff, has died. His passing was announced by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the Vatican camerlengo. Bells tolled in church towers across Rome after the announcement. The Pope survived a 38-day stay in Gemelli Hospital for a respiratory crisis, emerging yesterday to bless thousands of people in St. Peter's Square for Easter Sunday. He then surprised them by riding in the Pope-mobile through the piazza. Later in the day, he met briefly with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. The passing of a pope is a monumental event for a church numbering 1.4 billion across the world. Francis's pontificate was especially historic and often controversial. Journalists and historians will be discussing and debating his leadership for many days. His statements and actions with regard to women, LGBTQ people, clergy sexual abuse, migrants, Vatican reform, and the priesthood were applauded by many and opposed by many others. Of all that could be said about Pope Francis this morning, however, I want to focus on his humility. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in Argentina on December the 17th, 1936. A rising star in the Catholic Church, he was appointed head of all Jesuits in Argentina and Uruguay at the age of 36, but what he later called my authoritarian and quick manner of making decisions led to deep divisions in the Jesuit community. As a result, he was exiled for 2 years in Argentina, a period Bergoglio later called a time of interior crisis. The priest who emerged was more humble, servant-hearted, and people-centered. He learned that caring for hurting souls is the church's primary responsibility, and leaders must lead with humility and compassion. He began concluding every conversation by asking the other person to pray for him, a practice he continued as Pope. Even when he became Archbishop of Argentina, he chose to live in simple quarters, ride public transportation, and cook his own meals. When Cardinal Bergoglio was chosen as Pope in 2013, his first act was to receive his fellow cardinals as their peer, standing on their level. For his first public appearance, he wore a white cassock, the ordinary papal dress, rather than the more formal red ermine-trimmed mozzetta used by previous popes. He chose to wear the same iron pectoral cross he had worn as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, rather than the gold one used by his papal predecessors. In his first public act as Pope, before he blessed the pilgrims standing in Mass in St. Peter's Square, he asked them to pray for his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, and for himself. He then chose to remain in the Vatican guest house rather than moving to the official papal residence in the Apostolic Palace. He was the first pope since Pius X, who died in 1914, not to live in the spacious papal apartments. He wore his old orthotic shoes rather than the red loafers of the papacy and rode in compact cars. On his first Holy Thursday following his election, Francis participated in the traditional Maundy-Thursday foot washing service, choosing 12 people, symbolizing the 12 disciples. However, the 12 he chose were not wealthy or notable people of significance in the church. They were juvenile offenders from Rome's Casal del Marmo detention facility. After he washed and kissed their feet, he said to them, "Washing your feet means I am at your service." 2 of the 12 were female, making Francis the first pope ever to wash the feet of a woman. In addition, 2 of the juvenile offenders were Muslim. His first trip as pope was to the island of Lampedusa, then central to Europe's migrant crisis. He consistently visited countries where Christians were persecuted minorities. Camerlengo Farrell said of Pope Francis at his death this morning, "He taught us to live the values of the gospel with faithfulness, courage, and universal love, especially for the poorest and most marginalized." Humility. The decision to place the Lord and others before ourselves is not just an important principle for Christians who wish to be used by God, it is the foundation of all the others. Jesus began his Sermon on the Mount with the proclamation in Matthew 5, verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Poor translates tokos, which means to be impoverished as to beg for food from others. The beatitude can be rendered, "Blessed are those who know their desperate need of God, for they make him their king and advance his kingdom." All that follows in Jesus' sermon and the Christian life is based on this. The commission of the church to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth can be fulfilled only in the power of the Holy Spirit from Acts 1:8, and that power can be given only to those who are yielded to the Lord, referenced in Acts 1 verse 14 and Acts 2 verse 4. The courage of the church in fulfilling its commission is fueled by the Spirit when we are surrendered to Him and filled by Him, noted in Acts 2:4, Acts 4:8 and 31, and Acts chapter 13, verse 9. The character of the church, as exemplified by the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23, can be manifested by the Spirit only in those who are humbled and submitted before Him, according to Ephesians 5:18. The compassion of the church for the least, the last, and the lost, a commitment so exemplified by Pope Francis, is fueled by the compassion of Christ, as we read in Matthew 9, verse 36, Matthew 14, verse 14, and Luke 7, verse 13, when we humble ourselves before His Spirit. If you were to ask evangelicals to identify the three greatest preachers of recent generations, many would include Charles Spurgeon, Dwight Moody, and Billy Graham. What do they have in common? Spurgeon said of himself, "Without the Spirit of God, I feel I am utterly unable to speak to you. I have not those gifts and talents which qualify me to speak. I need an afflatus from on high, otherwise I stand like other men and have naught to say. May that be given to me, for without it I am dumb." End quote. And God used him to preach to 10 million people across His ministry. D.L. Moody was the son of an alcoholic when Moody was 4 years old. He completed 7 grades of school. He said of himself, "I know that other men can preach better than I can. All I can say is that when I preach, God uses me." End quote. And God did. More than 1 million people came to Christ through Moody's ministry. Billy Graham said of himself, "I have often said that the first thing I am going to do when I get to heaven is to ask, 'Why me, Lord? Why did you choose a farm boy from North Carolina to preach to so many people, to have such a wonderful team of associates, and to have a part in what you were doing in the latter half of the 20th century?' I have thought about that question a great deal, but I know also that only God knows the answer." End quote. And he preached to more than anyone in Christian history. Why did God use them? Because they were submitted to the Lord in humility. Who will be next? The conversation is coming, and maybe it's already happened. A friend, a family member, a coworker, someone you care about wrestling with identity, searching for answers. When that moment comes, will you be ready? Who Am I? The new book from Denison Forum is your guide to responding with biblical truth and compassion. It unpacks what it means to be made in God's image, because identity isn't something we create, it's something we receive. And here's the thing, this is your last chance to get your copy as a thank you for any donation. So equip yourself with the wisdom you need for the conversations that are already happening. Go now to supportdf.org. That's support, the letter D, the letter F.org. Time is running out, but the need for truth isn't. Get your copy of Who Am I today.